War is hell. It reaches every hand, from the soldier in the trench to the nurse at his side, from the engineer forging weapons to the families left behind. These are their stories. This is World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches. Today's episode, Sunsets at Lindenfeld. She covered her head with her pillow to try and block out the noise that surrounded her. It came from upstairs, from outside, and from everywhere in between. She had known this day was coming. It had been discussed since the outbreak of the war. There had been talk, too, of the last time. More than 100 years ago, long before her father, before even her grandfather, soldiers had filled Lindenfeld Estate. They had slept in the rooms, eaten at the same tables, walked the lawns until the grass gave way beneath them. Even the vineyards had not been spared. The story had been told often enough, always with a certain pride, as though the estate had done its part when it was called upon. Klara Lindenfeld never questioned her father. So the evening before, when she and her sisters had been told that their belongings were being moved to the basement rooms in an effort to accommodate the army, she did not question it. She sat and watched as the servants got to work, relocating the three girls to the large room that had once been used as a wine cellar. There was very little light in the room, especially now that the oil lamps had been extinguished. The windows were small and set high, near the ceiling. Dust clung to the glass, allowing very little light through. She stood from her bed and stretched. Then she looked at her sisters, still sleeping. Of course they were. How they managed it, she did not know. She had never shared a space with her sisters before. This was going to be a new experience. Her older sister, Eva, was 22. She was not a pretty girl, but she had suitors, just none the family had accepted so far. Her younger sister, Sarah, was the gem of their father's eye. At just 14, she had already learned how to wrap a man around her finger. Their father had been the first. Klara had never had that effect on anyone, nor had she ever had a suitor. She struggled to find her wardrobe in the dim morning light. She felt her eyes strain as she searched. It was even more of a struggle to find an adequate dress once she did. Once dressed, she made her way to the staircase that led upstairs. Nothing in the house had been changed. Not yet. The furniture remained in its accustomed place. The decor still hung on the walls. She stepped out onto the large veranda that stretched the entire length of the front of the house. Lindenfeld Estate had been in her family for over 2 centuries. The estate sprawled across 600 acres, with the house and gardens secondary to the vast vineyards that made up more than 400 of them. At its front, a line of hedgerows marked the boundary of the property, and beyond that lay the town of Varga. The town supplied workers to the vineyards in the area, including Lindenfeld. Along the right boundary stood the Varga estate, older and once the greater holding in the area from which the town had taken its name. That had changed. Lindenfeld had long since surpassed it. From the veranda, she could see it all at once. Along the road, military wagons still arrived from the town, their wheels cutting deep into the earth as men moved beside them, shouting and gesturing without order. Closer to the house, tents had already begun to rise, scattered across the lawn in uneven lines. The grass, once kept in careful order, was being trampled beneath the hooves of restless horses and wagons they pulled. The narrow stream that cut through the grounds had been claimed as well. Young men sat along its banks, their boots removed, their feet dangling in the shallow water, as though they had come for leisure rather than war. "Oh my! It's pure chaos," she said to herself. "Only for now." The voice came from behind her. "Give it time. Once everything is in its place, you will see order." She turned. He stood a few paces back, the gray of his uniform still clean against the morning light. Leather straps crossed his chest, the rest of his gear worn with a kind of quiet familiarity. She had seen him before. Not here, though, and most certainly not like this. "Miklos Varga," she whispered. "Klara Lindenfeld," he said. Then, after a pause, "Now that we remember each other's names, how are you?" "Well, aside from the army taking over my home, I suppose I'm fine." She studied him for a moment. "So, you joined the army?" He stepped beside her and looked out towards the activity in the front of the house. "Felt like I had to." He glanced back at her. When the heir to the throne is murdered, one feels compelled to stand up and help avenge him. "And her," she said. "Yes, and her." "So how does this all work?" she asked. "How does what work?" "You just take over the house, the kitchen, the dining room, all the bedrooms?" He smiled. "Only the officers will be in the house." He gestured towards the lawn. "The rest of the men will be in tents, as you can see." "How long will this last?" "My guess? The duration of the war." Another voice joined them. "Miklos Varga, haven't seen you since your 15th birthday." Her father. Miklos turned. "Baron von Lindenfeld, it's good to see you again." They shook hands. "What are you, a captain?" Miklos laughed. "No, sir, just a sergeant." Her father surveyed the land before them. "That's a lot of men." "Yes, sir." "How is your father?" "He's well, sir. He knows that I'm here." "That's good. Will you be going home nightly or staying here with the men?" Miklos glanced towards the hedgerow that marked the boundary between the Lindenfeld and Varga lands. "I'll be staying here, sir. No special treatment." There was a tension in the air that Klara could feel but not yet understand. "Just think, Miklos," her father said as he clasped his hand firmly on the young man's shoulder. "All of these men, and yourself, you're going to avenge the Archduke's murder and make Austria-Hungary proud. You're going to make your father proud. If I had sons, they would fight too." The words lingered. Miklos said nothing. "It was a good offer," her father added. "Offer?" she asked. "What offer?" Her father looked at her. "Miklos knows what I'm talking about." Now she was confused. Had her father tried to buy the Varga land and had been refused? Miklos turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "It was a good offer," he said. "Perhaps we can revisit it after I return from the war." Her father turned slowly towards him. "If you return from the war." The parlor had been reserved for the family, one of the few parts of the house still off limits to the soldiers, aside from the sleeping rooms. It was mid-morning the following Tuesday when Klara entered and found her sisters already seated by the fireplace, nursing cups of tea. The family generally kept 15 servants. Now, 10 had been reassigned to assist the army around the house. She sat beside her younger sister Sarah and motioned to Marta, one of the few servants who remained. "Marta, a cup of tea, please." Without a word, Marta slipped into the adjoining room and returned moments later with a steaming cup. Klara took it, sipped, and gave a quiet thanks as Marta stepped back, attempting to disappear into the room. Servants often did this, keeping themselves close enough to be useful, but far enough to go unnoticed. The girl sat quietly for a moment before Eva broke the silence. "This house doesn't feel like home anymore." It was Sarah who spoke next. "I kind of like it." Eva was taken aback by this. "What do you mean? It's chaos here every single day, and we cannot go anywhere in the house without running into the men. It's very unbecoming." "Sarah gets a lot of attention. That's why she likes it," Klara added. Sarah looked at her sister. "Are you jealous, Klara?" Klara was jealous, but that was something she would never admit, especially to her sisters. "I will not dignify that with a response, Sarah." Sarah looked up dreamily at the ceiling. "Well, there is one soldier. I'm not sure of his name. He brings me daisies from the meadow. I think that's nice." "Klaus used to bring me daisies." Klaus was the son of a landowner that Eva had met at a social event in Vienna a year ago. They had taken a shine to each other, and Klaus had come to visit 3 times since then, and during the last visit he had asked for Eva's hand in marriage, a request that her father had refused. Klaus was a nice man, Sarah finally added. Eva, indignant now, spoke again. He was, and father rejected his marriage proposal, without grounds even. Klara sighed loud enough for both the girls to hear her. They looked at her. Klaus is a nice man, but you have to understand the reason for the rejection. Klaus, even as a landowner's son, has never been a responsible person. Whomever you marry, Eva, will be the person who attaches his name to this land when father is gone. Father has to think of more than just your happiness. Almost pouting now, Eva added, I wish father would have had a son. There was a commotion outside, one louder than normal. The girls' attention turned towards the large double doors that exited the parlor and onto the front veranda. What's that? Asked Sarah as she leapt up and made her way towards the doors. Klara rose to follow. I don't know. Eva, who was deep into her own mental melodrama now, stayed put. 2 men stood in the yard, facing one another, their fists raised as if ready to strike. A moment later, they were surrounded by others, voices rising as the circle tightened. Klara felt something stir, not concern, something closer to curiosity. Before a blow could land, a voice cut through the noise. Stop this! Another man pushed through the gathering and stepped between them. Klara could not hear what he said once he reached them, but whatever it was, it carried weight. His voice dropped, controlled, measured. The 2 men lowered their hands. After a moment, they shook, then clasped each other on the shoulder before turning away. The crowd broke just as quickly as it had formed. He remained. It was Miklos. She did not even hear herself mutter under her breath, "Oh my!" But Sarah did. Klara entered the library just after lunch. There she saw Miklos, a man she had never truly noticed until the week before, when he had broken up the fight in the yard. In that moment, she had seen how commanding he was, how persuasive, and, more importantly, how respected he was by the other men. She took a seat across from him. He looked up. Why, Klara, what a surprise! He glanced around the room, as though mindful of who might be listening. What are you doing here? She ignored the question. What are you reading? She asked. He lowered the book slightly and looked at the cover. Just a manual on battle tactics. It's not required, but if I want a promotion, it helps. Interesting. She paused, then added, So, what was the offer? He looked up. What offer? She tilted her head. You know which one. The one my father made. He set the book down, leaving it open, and turning his full attention to her. Oh, that offer. Yes, tell me about it. He wanted to buy our land, the estate. He did? She had suspected this, but the confirmation still surprised her. They already held the largest estate in Western Hungary. Why would he want more? He did, Miklos said, and it was a good offer, I'll admit that, but my father's a proud man. He would not sell our home, not for any amount. Well, why not? She asked. He studied her for a moment. That land has been in our family for 2 centuries. How would it look if he were the one to give it up? He leaned back slightly. Did you know it was once the largest vineyard in all of Hungary? That's why the town bears our name. I knew that, she said quietly. Then you understand. The offer itself was not the problem. The suggestion of it was. He paused. My father was offended. Deeply. He's not pleased that I'm here now, staying on your land. Not pleased at all. When do you leave? She asked. As it stands, in 2 weeks. The men need a bit more drilling with the rifles and bayonets. 2 weeks, she said almost to herself. Then you leave. What was that? Nothing. She rose to go. At the door, she stopped and turned back towards him. Have you ever seen the sunset from the veranda? He had met her just before sunset every night for the past 2 weeks. They always stood a few feet apart to avoid scandal. Sometimes they leaned forward against the railing, and sometimes they sat in chairs. No matter how they were positioned, the result was always the same. A beautiful mosaic of orange hues low in the western sky as the sun dipped beyond the hedgerows that separated the land from the town just to the west. All three girls had taken different approaches regarding the soldiers that now took space on the land. Klara spent most of her days in the parlor and evenings on the veranda. Ava sheltered herself in the basement room, too shy to be sociable and too depressed over her father's rejection of Klaus. Sarah, on the other hand, was a social butterfly. She spent the bulk of her time tending to the soldiers' needs, such as taking them cold water and biscuits. She also flirted, and she flirted a lot. Klara often noticed that the men were in high spirits when Sarah was around. Tonight, Klara sat in the chair with Miklos next to her. They looked on as Sarah sat by a campfire talking to 3 young soldiers. Klara looked over at Miklos. He had a look of concern on his face tonight. "Is something wrong, Miklos?" she asked him. His hands fidgeted in his lap as he looked at her. "We got the orders. We all ship out in the morning." She was not surprised. He had said before that they would ship in 2 weeks. But with this news, she felt something in the pit of her stomach. What was that? She thought to herself. Quietly she said, "You're going to France?" "Serbia, actually. Me and all these men." He stood from the chair and moved to stand before her. "Tomorrow, a whole new crop of men will arrive for the same training, the same flirting from Sarah, and the same sunsets." She looked up at him. "To be honest, I don't want to watch sunsets with anyone else. I've enjoyed talking to you, learning about you, about your family. Imagine living next to someone your whole life and never really knowing them." He smiled and leaned down towards her, their faces inches away from each other. "I feel the same, Klara. I've known you my whole life, but it's not until I got to know you that I fell in love." He straightened abruptly, turned, and walked to the railing. Her mind was a flurry of thought. Had he just said that? Had he just said he loved her? It was her turn to stand now. "Miklos!" He turned to face her. She felt tears streaming down her face and tasted the salt on her smiling lips. "Did you just say you loved me?" He looked ashamed, like he was scared of her response. "I did." "You tell me the day before you're to go to war?" "I do. I could not leave here without you knowing." Her body reacted faster than her mind could, and she found herself sprinting the 6 steps across the veranda and throwing herself into his arms. Then the intrusive thoughts began. He was going to war. She had finally fallen in love with a wonderful man, and he was going off to war. In all likelihood, he would die there. "If you don't come back, sunsets are dead to me," she whispered. He chuckled under his breath. "Sunsets will happen no matter what happens to me, Klara." She pulled away and turned her head up to look at him. "But I won't watch another one, not without you." "Someday there will be a knock on the door here, and it will be me," she interrupted. "Or someone come to tell me that you're dead." He searched for a response for a moment and said, "That's a more likely scenario." "Oh, Miklos, don't say that." The anger within her at those words was immediate, and she punched his shoulder. "Don't you even dare talk like that. You will come back." "You said it first," she replied. There was an uncomfortable silence for a minute until Miklos spoke again. "Does this mean that you love me too?" he asked. "What's this?" The voice came from behind them. It was her father again. Miklos straightened up quickly. "Baron von Lindenfeld, I was just giving Klara the news." Klara looked at her father. He was not surprised. He did not need to be told what the news was. He already knew. Her father walked towards her and took her face into his hands. He kissed her forehead and ran his thumb down her tear-streaked cheek. "You knew?" she asked her father. "Yes, my love, I was told this morning," he said with a softness in his voice. I'm scared for Miklos. I don't want him to die. Trust me, I don't want to die either. It was Miklos' attempt at adding some levity to the moment. Klara and her father smiled. She took a step back from her father and looked back at Miklos. I'm in love, father. At least, I think I am. My stomach is in knots when he's not around, and it's full of butterflies when he is. I've never felt like this, father. Her father looked stoic for a moment, and then smiled. I know. I've been watching. In fact, it was Miklos who came to me this morning to tell me about the orders. He did? She asked, surprised. Yes, when he asked for your hand in marriage. She looked again at Miklos, then at her father. Marriage? Miklos stepped toward her and took her hands in his. She saw the breath catch in his throat as he tried to speak. He glanced towards her father, nervous now, and she felt her own uncertainty rise with his. What was happening? He steadied himself, then slowly lowered to one knee. Was this really happening? Now? Klara, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Her hand rose to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. In that moment, she saw her father and Miklos exchange a look. She understood then. His arrival had not been by chance. They had planned this together. Yes, she said, the word breaking through her breath. Yes, I will marry you. I would marry you 100 times if I could. Miklos rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her gently. She turned to her father and rushed to his arms. She thanked him through her tears. I only wish your mother was here. Klara, whose mother had died 3 years ago, wished the same. But she had her father, and that was enough for right now. Her father pushed her away abruptly. You need to go take a nap. She was confused. She just got engaged, and now her father was separating them the night before her fiancé was to leave for Serbia? But father, why? I want to spend time with Miklos. He smiled at her again. A 2-hour nap. The preacher will be here to marry you at 10 p.m. She often sat alone on the veranda now, not at sunset, but in the morning. Miklos had no ring to give her. Instead, she wore one that had belonged to her great-grandmother. It was loose on her finger, but still beautiful, and she found herself admiring it often. She thought back to that night, now a year past. It had all happened so quickly. She and Miklos, her husband, had confessed what they felt, and by night's end they had been married. Even Miklos' parents had put aside their pride to attend. Her father had arranged for her old room to be readied for them, and it had been done. They were both new to love. Nothing had been rushed. They had spent that first night speaking in quiet tones, learning one another. Their closeness was found in whispered conversation, in gentle touches, in the unfamiliar comfort of simply being together. Over the past year, she had watched men come and go. Sarah continued to flirt, offering smiles and small kindnesses that carried more meaning than she intended. Even Ava had begun to emerge, joining the others from time to time. That, Klara thought, was a good thing. Her father had spoken with her often about the future of the estate. If Ava never married, the land would pass to her and Miklos. He had detailed plans for how it should be managed. There had been a time when Klara feared her father had agreed to the marriage for that reason alone. That had been a way to draw the Varga land into his own. But when she learned that Miklos had an older brother and would not inherit, those fears had erased. She sipped her tea and watched as the soldiers in the yard formed their familiar lines and began their drills. Ava joined her. Good morning, Klara. Good morning, Ava. May I join you this morning? The question surprised her. Of course, this is your home as well. Ava sat in the chair beside her, and for a time they watched in silence. This had become their routine. Soldiers everywhere, the front yard worn down to earth, the house stripped of privacy beyond the parlor and the rooms where they slept. Even the vineyards had not been spared. "Klara," Eva said quietly, "do you ever wonder how many of the men who have passed through here are dead?" Klara turned to her, startled. "Why would you ask that?" "I don't know. It just came to me." "Then let it go," Klara said. "I don't want to think like that." They fell silent again. "Father relented on Klaus." Klara turned back to her. "He did? That's wonderful news." "Yes," Eva kept her eyes forward. "He sent a letter to the Richters last week." "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted an answer first. I didn't want to be humiliated if he had already married or decided I was no longer worth waiting for." Klara studied her now. Something in her tone had shifted. "Well?" Eva nodded once. "The reply came this morning. They agreed." Relief washed through Klara. "Eva, that is wonderful." "Yes," Eva said quietly, "it is." She paused. "But Klaus is in France." Klara said nothing. "So it seems I'm engaged to a man at war, just as you are married to one." Her voice had dropped, nearly lost to the morning air. Klara reached for something hopeful, something steady. "You're engaged to a man that you love," she said. "That matters." But even as she spoke, she knew. War had already begun to decide things for them. As a married woman, a concession had to be made. Klara's father, the baron of the estate, would not allow her to remain in the basement rooms. She had been moved to the 4th floor of the house and given the entire level. The military leaders were not pleased. It meant more of their officers would be forced into tents or made to share rooms. But Baron von Lindenfeld would not yield. The floor held 4 rooms, and Klara insisted her sisters be brought up as well. At first, her father refused, but she pressed him. Eva was soon to be married, and Sarah should not be left alone below. In the end, he relented. The war had been raging in Europe for 3 years. Letters came from Miklos, and she read each one over and over, most often just before sleep. She longed for him, for the quiet of that single night they had shared as husband and wife. His last letter had not come from Serbia, but from France. He had seen fighting across Europe now, Serbia, then Belgium, and now France. He wrote of his love for her. He wrote of the trenches, of hunger, of poor leadership, and the constant need for dry socks. She feared for him always. This morning, she sat in her room reading one of his letters when hunger began to press at her. She rose, still reading, and stepped into the hallway. A biscuit, perhaps, would be enough. She read as she descended the stairs. Then she heard the knock. She stopped on the landing above the front hall, the letter still in her hands. She watched as a servant arrived from an adjacent room and moved towards the door to open it. As the door opened, Klara looked beyond it and saw a person standing there, a man. Klara could not breathe. Her vision clouded with the tears that had begun to flow. The letter slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. You've been listening to World War I Stories, Tales Beyond the Trenches, where history comes alive through the lives of those who lived it. If this episode moved you, please share it, follow, and leave a rating. Help keep these stories alive. Want to hold these stories in your hand? Explore the books inspired by them, available now on Kindle and in paperback.